Well, I want to say thanks to everyone for continuing on as I work through this extension top upholstery project. I trimmed off the edges in the last video, and now we have this rough edge that we have to deal with. So I'm going to make a couple of border strips that'll go down each side. And inside this, I'm going to put about a 2-inch piece of heavy material for reinforcement. I'm going to take one edge of the headliner material and fold it over, 5/8 or so, and sew down this one edge. To me, one of the biggest challenges in running a sewing machine is sewing a straight line. This reinforcement strip is offset to one side, so I have a long leg left that I still need to fold over and sew it down. I'm going to keep it tight to the edge of the inside 2-inch material and go ahead and finish that side. The remaining loose flap on this border strip is going to come into play a little further down the road. If you remember from the very first video that I started working on this top in disassembling, I mentioned that this top was not initially built for the buggy that it's now going to fit, so I had to make some modifications. Ideally, I would like all these joints to be in a perfect straight line, but they aren't quite. You see these buttons are not in a line, the front one is too high. And even inside, these nails represent where the nails were on the old border strip. See how the first one, front bow, is too high? So I have to do a little bit of deceptive work here. I have to try to make it look like it's all in a line. That's just part of the challenge of restoring and repairing. Not everything is always ideal. So I'm going to have to move the location on the front socket where this border strip needs to go. The other 3 bows and sockets are not ideal either, but this leading bow is the biggest challenge out of all 4. One unique thing about buggy tops is they have to be made to the individual buggy. They're not interchangeable. And when you move one top from one buggy to another buggy, it just changes the whole dynamics. In the work of restoration, part of the challenge is to be as authentic and correct as it can be. So it's times like this that just kind of messes with my head. It's not right, but I have to make it work. So this is where I really get involved in what I call the art of deception. I have to trick the eye so you don't see what's really there. So when this border strip becomes the finished edge for the headliner, the rough edge of the headliner now fits behind the main part of the strip that has the 2-inch webbing in it and fits in between it and the loose flap. So as I work my way backwards through the bows, I'm trying to find the happy medium and make the eye see something straight when it really isn't. Now the loose flap on the border strip is trimmed to fit in between each of the sockets. Now this headliner border can be trimmed to length. And this is how we see that the headliner raw edge fits between the border and the loose flap. I'm going to go ahead and take some spray adhesive and glue the headliner to the strap, and that's what will actually pull and stretch the headliner down. Even the original top was fastened in this method. Even though the headliner is glued to this border strip, the outside loose flap is still not yet attached. There's another piece that still comes into play. Now I can go ahead and finish tacking this border strip into place. And hopefully we get it to where it's not too offensive to the eye. Now we're going to switch to the rear curtain. On each side of the curtain is a quarter panel. This will hold the top down to what's called a shifting rail that this top is mounted on the back seat. On both the quarter panel and the center curtain are some little metal fasteners that we would like to keep and transfer over to the new top. These are little spring-loaded clips that fastens the curtain to the quarter panels, and their fasteners are kind of hidden between the outer layer and the inner layer. So we're going to do some detective work and try to get them removed. It's these thin little tabs and metal plates that keep them fastened to the material. And in the process of taking these apart, you actually discover, or in a sense, are being taught how it was done originally. So even in the process of taking these apart, my mind is running through the steps of how I have to do this in reverse to make it be the same. In salvaging these drive knobs and little curtain buttons, I can't just bend the tabs back or they'll end up breaking. So I'm going to take a small torch and heat them up and straighten them out and try to salvage them. In a sense, we're annealing them. These drive knobs really weren't too bad, but when I got into working with these little buttons for the spring clips, I don't know what kind of material it was, but they were tough. But I eventually got them all, cleaned them up, repainted them to where they'll be usable again. And because the old material is dried and shrunk up, I'm going to measure right from the top and make them over. The material for the topping itself is a vinyl that's designed specifically for these folding tops. The original top had leather both for this quarter panels for the rear curtain and the quarter panels for the top. But I'm going to use this material throughout the whole process. So these two strips are going to be for the side quarters, and then I'm going to make a center for the curtain itself. These rear quarter panels have to be fairly strong, so I'm going to reinforce them again with this heavy vinyl. It's an old roll that I use strictly for this. It's had some damage to it, water damage over the years, but it goes inside, it's never seen, but it's a good heavy material. It's very similar to a 24 ounce canvas. And I can usually cut around any of the damaged spots anyway. So each of the quarter panels gets reinforced with one of these strips. And since we don't want to see this strip, we're going to take some headliner material and we're going to cover the inside of these quarter panels. These quarter panels I'm going to reinforce with strips of the topping material itself. And to help keep these aligned while I'm sewing down the edges and the two panels together, I'm going to put a little adhesive on them just to keep them from shifting. The inside reinforcement strips are actually the finished size that I want. I have about 3/4 of an inch extra on the headliner and the topping material. So I'm going to go ahead and fold it over and work these seams into their position. Then the headliner material will fit on top, and this is how they will finish out. Now when we examine the stitching pattern, we'll see that there's 2 rows of stitchings, but it's not on the inside. So the inside second row of stitching is only on the outer cover, not through the headliner. So I'm going to get that marked out and stitch in that row before we assemble the 2 pieces. Since this machine doesn't have a reverse, notice how I back stitch to lock the stitch. And wipe away the chalk and we're good to go. Now I need to mark out where the drive knobs and the curtain button went. And you remember, these all get fastened on before the top headliner material. And having annealed them with a torch allows me to bend them back into place without breaking. Now on the upper outer edge, you can see that the stitching stopped on the headliner side, but continues through the outer side. This is where the top quarter of the top deck has to come in. So I have to stitch this top just for this 8 or 9 inches by itself. So now I can finally assemble the top and bottom layers and do the final edge stitch. And I'll start where I finish sewing the first 8 inches. This will allow the open seam where I can insert the top quarter panels when we get to that point. Now we should be ready to begin their assembly to the top itself. I'm going to put my marks and check and then maybe even recheck to make sure I get the positions right. Now remember the jute webbing that goes down each side, that's what takes all the slack out of the bows from front to back. Well, these back quarter panels is what takes all the slack or the tension out of the whole top down to the shifting rail. The bottom of these quarter panels will be attached permanently to the shifting rail. And the shifting rail is what attaches to the rear seat of the Surrey. This is about as far as we're going to make it. Next week we'll start with the rear curtain and get into the top. Once again, thanks for watching.